Hi, and welcome back. As you can see, I'm sitting with my trusty friend, the Baratza Encore ESP, and we got this about a year and a half ago, and we did a previous video talking about our whole evolution of grinders to arrive at this one, and we'll link that below. But I thought it was about time that I sort of give you a report on how I'm feeling and what I've learned about the ESP in the last year and a half of using it. Now we use it a lot, at least twice, usually 3 times a day. And we do a real mix of things because we definitely have espressos in the morning. Nadia has her nice sort of milky Americano. I have a couple of double espressos. And then later in the day, I tend to want to brew like a cup or 2 of coffee, and I'll use the Chemex machine, which requires a completely different grind. And sometimes I'm in the mood for making French press, which is a different grind altogether. So we use a range of the grind settings, and we've been really, really happy with that aspect of the grinder. It's a very simple adjustment, and it's easy to see. You don't have to lift things off and dig into the machine. It's just turn the hopper and you adjust your grind settings. And we have found that, especially with the espresso and using the Coffee Lot robot, we make very small adjustments. As the coffee sort of oxidizes in or off-gasses its CO2, and over the course of even a week of keeping the coffee, we tend to buy more coffee every week, but even over the course of that, or a week or 2 weeks, the density of the coffee beans changes, and we have to adjust the grind setting, because using the Coffee Lot robot, we can feel the difference in the grinds as we're pressing down through the grinds to make espresso. So this has suited very well to the Coffee Lot espresso or to any espresso machine, because it is so easy and quick to adjust your grind settings. So we have really, really enjoyed that. But in the process of using this machine, we have also discovered some little quirks and little gotchas that you can stumble into. And so I thought I'd make this video and share them with you so that you can sort of avoid some of the frustrating mistakes that I have made. I've had a few little swearing sessions at this machine before I figured out what I was doing wrong. So let's talk. First off, you'll note we do not have the standard sort of conical hopper on this. We have a single dose hopper, which we got from Baratza Gear. I really like it. We measure our bean, whenever we're making coffee, we weigh our beans going in, and so it's easier to single dose. This machine doesn't have a method for dosing. So if you're grinding it, you just turn it on, and I suppose you could stand with a stopwatch and try and time it. But we find it much easier to weigh our beans going in, and therefore the single dose hopper is really convenient. In fact, you can use the hopper itself if you want as your measuring cup, and then just pour in from there. Works really nicely. And I like that it's very compact, and it's sort of uniformly black. It sort of blends into the background, no problem. So we like this single dose hopper. And when I initially got the machine and we did the first video, I noted that we started out using the espresso dosing cup, which goes in right here, and you grind into that, and then it's very easy to flip into your portafilter. But I found that no matter what I did, because of the space between the dosing cup and the opening of this, coffee always ends up on the counter, and that drives both of us nuts. So we've continued to opt to just use the regular grounds cup, which is nicely closed in, so nothing escapes. right? We do use a little spritz of water on the beans to prevent static from building up so they don't like cling to the side of this. But the nice thing is the beans fall really nicely in there. And with the Coffee Lot Robot, because it has a deep hopper in the portafilter, it's really easy to sort of pour from this into the portafilter. It's not like pouring into a regular espresso portafilter. So that works really well for us. You know, your mileage may vary. You may prefer the dosing cup to go into an espresso portafilter. That's up to you. But we've been very happy with this. And of course, when I'm doing, you know, pour overs in the Chemex or making a French press, this is perfectly convenient, and it really keeps the grounds really, really well contained. So that's how we've been rolling with this, using all the variable settings in a pretty wide range, and really happy with it. It keeps itself fairly clean, and we're quite thrilled with it. But there have been a few moments. First thing I encountered was what Baratza calls the quick release knob. So inside this, when you go to clean it, and I'll talk a little bit more about cleaning. When you pop this off by turning the hopper over and lifting it out, inside here, you can lift out the top part of the burr set. But then to release the bottom conical burr, there's a little knob, and it's a reverse threaded knob, which you have to stop and think about. But originally, it was a little plastic knob with a little thumb thing that you could grab. And the first couple of times I tried to release it, it was really hard to release. Maybe because I went the wrong way at first, but what ended up happening is the little plastic top part of the cap actually separated from the metallic threads. And when that happens, it does not work anymore. It's because it's just a thin little piece of brass threads and a plastic cap, and they came apart. And I've seen in some of the forums that other people have experienced this as well. Because you can tighten up on you a little bit, and then when you try and get it off, it ends up sort of separating itself. So what I did get is Baratza sells a reverse threaded wing nut. And the wing nut is very solid, it's metallic, and it's very firm and secure. So I've switched to that. They use that on a lot of their grinders, and it's been working just fine. So that's been great. Once I got that sorted out, that was much easier to deal with. The next thing I discovered was related to sort of cleaning and maintenance. The first thing I noticed as I was using it, because we measure our beans in, and then I often measure them coming out to put them into the little espresso portafilter, I started to notice that it was varying a lot in terms of what was going in and what was coming out. Like, I'd put in 18 grams and get out 15 grams or less. And it was sort of began to wonder, where's the coffee going? So I had a look, and I looked in here, and it was a major mess. There's coffee all around the inside. And so I cleaned it, tapped it all out, used a vacuum and all that stuff, and then put it back together. And here's the little gotcha. When you assemble it, when you put in the top ring that holds the top burr set, there's this little gasket, right? And the assembly instructions do tell you to put it with the thin part facing up. But For some reason, it seemed to me that it should fit facing down. Well, I was wrong. It is supposed to be facing up so that when this top goes on, it sort of fits around this thinner part of the flange and sort of closes off the beans escaping. When I did it the wrong way, two things happened. More beans escaped to all over the top surface of the grinder, and then eventually this little piece sort of shredded itself and popped right out of the top of the grinder, at which point I knew I'd done something wrong, because that's not supposed to happen. So, reread the instructions, got another of these little rubber. And the one thing that's great about Baratza grinders is it's very easy to order replacement parts, even in Canada. We can't order directly from Baratza. They don't ship to Canada, but there are a number of retailers who carry a full range of Baratza parts. I'll talk about that in a minute. So I ordered more of the top little thing and put it in the right way, and it worked a lot better. Yeah, when you assemble it correctly, it works better. That was fine, but a month or two later, I started to notice the same thing was happening. I seemed to be losing coffee in the machine. Again, pulled the top off, there was grinds everywhere. And then when I pulled this little gasket out, I noticed that its top had it had rippled. Like I guess as I was adjusting the grind, it sort of caused this to flare out a little bit and ripple and eventually tear. And then, of course, coffee's escaping, and eventually it would tear apart and pop out the top again. So I ordered a couple more of these, and I sort of figured, okay, well, this is a replacement part or a maintenance part, so I'll order a bunch of them. And when they arrived, I noticed that the design has changed a little bit. It's not plastic, it's some form of a rubber, is a little bit stiffer and sturdier, and the top flange is firmer. It doesn't go up quite as high, and it isn't quite as thin and flexible. So I think that Baratza recognized that there was a problem, and that the previous one was wearing out too quickly, so they made it a lot sturdier. So this is one of the more sturdy ones, and I'm sort of keeping an eye on it to see how long it lasts. But I've had this in for a little while now, and it's not showing any sign of spreading out or tearing or flaring, like rippling or anything. So I think they recognized and they've improved this part, which is great. So, and you still have to put it with the thin part on top. That works much better, and I'm much happier, and it seems to be running a lot better with that new gasket. On the subject of maintenance, I think it is fairly important to keep the grinder sort of clean on a regular basis. Now, as I said, the new gasket is really helping to sort of keep the beans contained within the conical filter or the conical grinder. So that's great. But you still need, stuff gets around and you sort of want to get it cleaned out. So I'm sort of trying to gauge how often, but around once a month, maybe 6 weeks, I like to just sort of take it apart and get rid of any buildup of coffee that's in there. Where the coffee comes out the bottom and into the catcher, if you've ground like a darker roast that's a bit oily, it can sort of gum up a little bit there and start to block that, and that's not good. So I think it's worthwhile doing fairly regular maintenance just to keep it clean and running smoothly. That brings me to what they refer to as the paddle wheel and felt. When you undo what is now the reverse threaded wing nut and pull out the bottom half of the burr set, underneath that is a little plastic piece, round plastic piece, with these little paddles on it. And that's responsible for basically moving the ground coffee towards the opening and down into the hopper. And Baratza in their instructions says you should check this fairly regularly because it is possible that these little wings can get damaged or break, in which case it's not going to move the coffee out of the grinder as efficiently. So that's something you should sort of check, as you're doing cleaning and maintenance. In addition to that, there's this little felt liner that goes in underneath this, right? And this does get pretty well coated with coffee grinds because it's moving the coffee grinds. So I find it's really helpful to keep this, as clean as you can. I just sort of use my fingers to knock off all the grinds. But I realized that this was probably a part that I should keep handy because if this little paddle wheel breaks or wears and stuff, it's going to be a bit of a pain. And they're very inexpensive parts. So I ordered what I thought was the paddle wheel and felt. And the description where I ordered it said paddle wheel and felt. And I looked at the picture in their catalog, looked like the paddle wheel and felt until I got it. And then I realized, you'll note, the paddle wheel for the ESP has 2 holes in it, and those holes go down over a turning metal piece, right? And without these 2 holes, this will not sit down. And secondly, the felt is deeper, it's thicker than the felt. I had the wrong part. It looked very similar, and in many ways it's almost identical. Then I went back, and the wrong part is identified as the paddle wheel and felt for the Virtuoso and various discontinued grinders. So this is the older design, right? This newer one is specifically for the Baratza and the Baratza ESP. It has the holes in the plastic to sit down over the metal part so that it spins and spits the coffee out, and the felt is thinner so it doesn't lift this off the spinning parts. If you are ordering these parts, be sure to order the right number, and we'll put those right up there. Now, the next thing you're going to encounter after you take out the bottom half of the burr set and take out the paddle wheel, and you can lift, and I use a pair of sort of long tweezers, like chef's tweezers. They make it actually a lot more convenient to get at these parts. And the next piece is the sort of metal thing with the 2 bumps that engages this. But then underneath that, and this is a mistake that's really easy to make, is there's a set of very, very thin shims, right? And the instructions in the Baratza instructions do refer to them, but it's easy to, not everybody reads every word of all the instructions like me. So these shims are very, very thin. So don't confuse them with washers, because Baratza sells replacement shims, and your machine comes with 2 additional shims, because the shims are used to adjust the position of the bottom burr. So if you find that it's not getting fine enough, right, you can insert additional shims to lift up the bottom burr, and then it will grind finer. But Baratza also sells little washer sets that look like the shims, but they're much thicker. And I did make the mistake of putting one of those washers in, and it completely throughout the whole, all of a sudden the grinder was lifted a whole lot more. So it was completely out of the espresso range. It was confusing when these things happen. So further investigation. So the shims are quite thin. In fact, they are 0.1 millimeter thick, each shim. 0.1 millimeter. So it's a very thin little shim of metal. And each shim, the machine comes with 6 shims. Now, there is some confusion in some of the forums. I think there may have been machines that got shipped out with more or less, but it seems now that all the machines are shipping with 6 shims, but they are so thin, it's really easy to not get them separated. And it's quite important when you're pulling them out, you can turn the machine over to dump them out, but be sure you have your hand underneath it, because they can roll away and be gone in nothing. So I generally prefer to use the tweezers to sort of lift them out of the machine. And you can see they get a little bit of sort of coffee oil buildup on them sometimes, so you can sort of rub them clean, and be sure that you keep, if you've inserted an extra shim or taken a shim out to adjust the bottom grinder, or the bottom burr, be sure that you count your shims, that they're all separated, and you sort of line them up to make sure they all go back in, because each shim is 0.1 millimeters thick, and it's equal to around 5 clicks on the espresso scale in terms of the fineness of the grind. So if you find that when you get your machine, your burr is brand new. As you use it, it starts to wear in a little bit, like the top edges might just wear a little bit. So you may find that you're getting down towards the lower end of the finer end of the espresso range. And if it's not getting as fine as you want, you could insert one of the additional shims that comes with it. So a lot of people have found that they do this. So you just need to be aware of how many shims you have in, and make sure that what comes out goes back in. and that you don't use a washer instead of a shim, because they look very similar, but they're a different thickness, and it throws the whole machine off. So that's some of the steps. And then once you've got everything out, and be careful, I made this mistake once too. I had the bottom burr out, and I blithely thought, I'll clean out the bottom. And I used a little hand vacuum that we have, and sure enough, it sucked up 2 of the shims. So I had to then open its little compartment and retrieve them. So if you're going to try and clean out the chamber, especially if you're using a vacuum or a blower, then make sure you have all the shims out first, and that you put them in a safe little row on your counter, and that they all go back in, because that's your calibration for the grind. Once you've got all that done, then I use a stiff brush, and I sort of brush around the inside of the grind chamber. I brush off the burrs themselves, get them nice and clean. You can even give them a little bit of wash, just be sure to get them dry again. And then I often I take a sort of bendable brush and push it through the opening where the grinds escape, to make sure that nothing has clogged up in there. And then I often do take the little hand vac and just sort of, suck out the last of the little bits of grinds that are in there. If I'm going to go doing this, I may as well get it completely clean as much as I possibly can. And then carefully, watching all your pieces and counting all your shims, put it back together, right? And once you've done this once or twice, it all starts to fall really easily into place, and you sort of remember all the things that I did wrong initially. Once you've done this a couple of times, it's really quick and easy to do. It's not a massive task, and I think that if you do it once a month, once every 6 weeks. It'll keep the grinder running really consistently and nice and clean. And that's what makes equipment last a long time. Those are some of the things that I have learned about this grinder over the last year and a half of using it every single day, and occasionally swearing at it when I make mistakes. But I've sort of gotten into a regular routine of, sort of cleaning it out when I suspect it's getting a little stuff packed in there. Coffee is clumpy stuff, so I think it's worthwhile keeping it nice and clean to put in a little bit of effort. It works beautifully consistently. We've been really, really pleased with it. And I know there are now some other competitors in a similar price range to this machine that, from what I've heard in reviews, that do a really good job. But I haven't heard of anything that does such a spectacularly better job at the range of grind settings that this does, that I feel like, oh my goodness, I'm missing something. I need to go to get a new grinder. We're both very happy with this one. It produces delicious coffee. It's consistent, and we've continued to enjoy it. So a year and a half later, we are very happy with our Baratza.